All right, good morning. It's 9:30 a.m. This is a meeting of the Assembly and Municipality Reapportionment Committee. It is Thursday, September 30th at 9:30 a.m. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here.
And then for other assembly members that are not committee members, Ms. Allard? Mr. Dunbar? Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Perez Verdia? Mr. Rivera? Mr. Weddleton? Ms. Salatel? Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, everybody. This morning, we have a brief agenda before us and a discussion about our process and what our plans are going forward. I had to turn off my camera because I got a notice that I have a unstable connection. It said turn off the video. Anyhow, so if you would, Madam Clerk, would you please go ahead and share the new website? So we have just published this website with the preliminary details of our work so that members of the public can see the documents that we're beginning to develop. I anticipate soon that we will get a timeline established that's actual as opposed to theoretical, which is in one of the documents that you'll see from last year or 2 years ago now. And I thought today that what we would do is just brief through some of these documents and then have an open conversation about how we intend to begin this process. I don't know if there are other items of business members would like to add, but for now, because of everything that we have going on, so much business, this is going to be a pretty light conversation, just beginning the conversation. So anyone have any input before we move into the documents? Any member? Okay, I'm not hearing anybody. So I think the first.
I was just going to thank you and the clerk for putting this together. It's really helpful to have everything in one space.
Awesome, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Yeah, I mean, there's so much more. Like, this is just the beginning. But none of this is, other than we have 2 proposals for contracted support that are in this list of documents. There is so much more we'll get up over time. The rest of this stuff is preliminary previous materials from earlier redistricting and reapportionment. So this is just a background homework for everybody to spend a little time with to understand what went before and where we're going. So thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Anyone else? Okay, so if you might open the Reapportionment Primer AO process document, Madam Clerk. Thank you. So most folks on the committee were here at this time when we started a discussion about reapportionment preliminary to the proposal and passage of the Proposition 12, which added a 12th member to the Assembly based on the upcoming reapportionment cycle. So once we do get our final draft plan from the state, we will officially be malapportioned, and a declaration of malapportionment will be forthcoming shortly. And so that is anticipated again for November the 10th. So I'm going to ask folks to kind of review this PowerPoint and in your own time, take your time to understand kind of how we got here. So if you might go back, Madam Clerk. So the next document is the Kentop v. Anchorage legal decision from 1982. And there has been much conversation about whether or not terms need to be truncated based on the malapportionment and new representation districts. And there's a really strong legal case on point for the municipality of Anchorage through the Supreme Court of the state of Alaska that found that the Assembly as a legislative body has the right to determine whether or not to truncate terms. And so for my friends who are more legally inclined, I strongly recommend you read this to understand the basis on which we move forward in making the decision of timeline for terms. Can you please go back to the website, Madam Clerk? So the email update, you don't need to open that. It's just a simple email from Assembly Council to us back in 2019 with a little bit of detail about how we got here. If you pop open now the reapportionment timeline, June 2021 presentation. Again, this is a briefing that we had from Assembly Council, which is an update to the conversation we had in 2019, which lays out the general timeline, but not the specific timeline. I'm going to ask us by our next meeting to have sorted through a proposed and draft timeline and adopt a timeline at our next meeting. So folks have an understanding of when and where we're going to be moving forward as planned, of course, leaving some flexibility. So can we go back? Next, you have two of the previous AOs for redistricting, also worth taking your time to go review. These are not the only ones. There are actually a couple from the 1980s as well that we'll get up here that might be more germane to part of the conversation. But those are the last two. Well, I think there might be an intervening document for the 2001 one, but I'll get that up here pretty soon. The next two documents, again, you don't need to open these, Madam Clerk, but they are the engagement letter and the task order proposal for the contractor who provided services in 2012, who was also reviewed this time. And those documents are basically that contractor's proposal to us. And then at the bottom, you see resource data proposal, redistricting services reduced. Those are two of the three potential contractors that we reviewed. I am looking for in my emails the one from the third contractor that we had discussions with, but at this point we have two of the three. And the one that actually I'm going to hand this off for a minute. Mr. France, would you like to discuss this part of the conversation? The contractor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, can we come back to this in a few minutes?
Absolutely. And we're not here to make any announcements, but just if you wanted, Madam Chair, just it would be fine to have a conversation about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So those are the preliminary documents that we have put up on the website for you to conduct your initial personal time investigation on the background of the conversation that we're about to engage. And from there, the whole point of this meeting, for lack of being quite ready to identify and select a contractor, we're just going to have an open conversation about what our plans are, how we'd like to see this move. I'll be taking notes, the clerk will be taking notes, and that will help us to conform this process. So now is a good time if you have questions you want to put on the table or begin a conversation. Anybody? This might be a very brief meeting.
Well,
And I
Chris,
think-
Mr. Constant, can you give us a little background? Oh, sorry, Crystal, I guess I don't know exactly where we are at the moment, and that might help.
Yeah, so really where we are at the moment is it's time for us to begin engaging this process in earnest, but most of us have been putting in an extra 15 hours a week. And so it's just been hard to get to the finalization of the contract with the contractor. But ultimately, from a timeline perspective, we have a decision to make. Are we going to proceed with all due haste, which means we get the timeline, draft up a declaration of malapportionment, get it introduced for action near November 10th, and then proceed with the contractor and have our timeline. There are questions about whether or not we should proceed and try to finish up in the spring, or the bounds of the charter provide that we can take 2 months from November even to declare malapportionment, and then 6 months after that to conduct the work. And so it's really kind of a philosophical conversation about where are we going? What's our timeline? What do we want to do? We're still preliminary.
Right. I'm sorry. Can I follow up?
Please.
I guess I thought you said, where are we with the contractor? And so I was wondering, have you talked with contractors? Do we have a couple you've narrowed down that do this work? I just don't really know this world very much. So how can the committee help you make that decision or what you need to do?
Yeah, so the clerk is, or excuse me, the chair will be making the decision on the contractor. However, if you go back to the website, Madam Clerk, and you look, there are 2 out of the 3 proposals that we reviewed are right there on the website. And we just wanted to provide for you an opportunity to review the proposals. So you have resource data at the very bottom, and then you have the engagement letter and task order #1 proposal. Those are 2 of the 3 contracts that are proposals that we reviewed. So there you can really look and see what they're both proposing and see which one is the value meal.
So we should look at those, but you're going to make a decision as to who to engage. And your question to us is then, what do we do next?
Absolutely. Like, what is our kind of philosophical approach? And again, I'm sorry for having a less fleshed out agenda, but like you, we've been in meetings all week, really late. And so, yes, the question is, what's the philosophical timeline we want to have a discussion about? Are we aiming for February? Are we aiming for May? Where are we aiming? And then from there, build a timeline to meet that. And I believe if you look at the proposals before us, they kind of spell out a timeline that's pretty good.
Got it. So maybe we just need a little time. Having not looked at those, it feels, I don't really know what timeline makes sense. I would say sooner is better than later, just because if we're malapportioned, we should try to fix it. But I guess without looking at the timeline and the excuse me, proposals and better understanding the parameters, I don't have a ton of feedback now. But I think Ms. Kennedy was trying to speak too. So I'll stop asking questions. I was just trying to move the conversation.
Yeah, I thank you for speaking up. And Ms. Kennedy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that I have any real difference of in questions than Ms. Quinn Davidson did, because I still also trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with this, with the documents that we have? What kind of feedback are you looking for now? And I think I got the answer just listening to your response to Ms. Quinn Davidson just a few minutes ago. But I guess one of my questions would be, as we go through these proposals and take a look at them, and we do come up with questions, further questions. I mean, I know one of mine, I've looked at all the documents, but I just glanced over them. So I haven't really delved into them to really try to analyze them in any way and come up with any other suggestions. But in terms of expertise that's actually being offered and whether or not somebody's actually been through this process before or anything similar to it, I would want to know that.
Yep.
So anyway, as questions come up, do those need to get directed to you? Do we keep them until we have a committee meeting again? How do you want that kind of feedback?
So I believe the best way to make the feedback is to email Mandy, the clerk for this committee, and ask her to share the questions with the committee. And in that way, we continue to honor the open meetings rules, but at the same time, we are able to communicate.
Okay, thank you. So I'm assuming that you want you want us to think about not only the contract, but the timeline as well. So
and any other questions? Yeah,
okay,
any other questions about the process that you think we should have on the table and begin to sort through? I will respond back that both of the contractors whose documents that are on the list have experience in conducting reapportionment and redistricting. And both of them list out the staff that they have for the proposal, kind of the support that they would be capable of providing. And so that is definitely there for you to understand how the decisions are being made.
Well,
and questions
Chair,
are
I did see that, and I did look at the per hour rate, but that didn't really give me a good sense of what this really would cost, because there were an awful lot of personnel that were I guess, suggested to be used in the process. So anyway, I don't know how much any of that would have to fluctuate depending on where the conversation goes and what we're asking of them. So I guess that would be my other question is, even though they're kind of giving us I guess their best guess at this point, how do we put some parameters on what we would spend, or do we not want to put any parameters on what we spend? Anyway, I guess there's just some other financial questions with that I'm kind of concerned with as well.
Thank you. Those are good questions. Other members?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as the timeline for completing the reapportionment districts, since we're not going to be able to get them done in time to have them on the ballot next April, I don't see any reason that we need to rush. So if it takes us till next spring, so be it. It's unfortunate that the data from the census was delayed, so that we won't be able to get the new district on the additional district member from your area on the ballot this spring, but that's the reality of the situation. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Peterson. And on that topic, legal counsel, who should be here soon, I'm sorry, Dean's not here yet, had a scheduling issue, but he'll be here in a minute. There are conversations happening about that 12th seat, and it very well could be a question that we sort through of having a special election for that seat because it's newly created once all of our work is done. But that really is a tomorrow question, but legal is doing analysis on that question.
Okay, thanks.
That's the one that'll flip over to the other committee once we're done with this process, the Ethics and Elections Committee. Other inputs?
Mr. Chair?
Madam France, Chair France.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment too that as the committee works through the information on the proposals, one thing that the chair, Mr. Constant, and I had discussed was the possibility of having, like an interactive map and some of the technology that could be used to support the public process and public comments. And while that is definitely something that clearly many folks would be interested in pursuing, it may be cost prohibitive. And so I just, wanted to add that one of the reasons why it's taking some time to work with the consultants and get proposals is that we've needed to go back and get and fine tune some of these requests as we've learned more about what's involved. It sounds very simple, but as I think you all know, oftentimes these things tend to be more involved and expensive. So I just wanted to add that piece, and then also just thank the committee members for taking on this work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Yeah, and that is an important point that you raised. In our initial request to folks, the contractors, we had asked about the possibility of, like the state, using some kind of tool where the public can draw their own maps and submit them to us. That would be internal to our system. And the reality is the cost of that's close to $70,000, and that's on top of the contract services. And so I think we might have made an executive decision that those dollars are not available to us to spend on this process. But there are a number of tools out there that are available that just don't sync up with our system, where people can use the census data to draw their own maps. And we anticipate maps being presented from third parties, just like happens with the state already. And so it's unlikely that we'll be taking on the process of allowing internal to our system members of the public to draw their own maps and submit them. They can externally, unless the committee decides that's money we want to spend.
Mr. Chair.
Madam Kennedy.
Do you anticipate any other proposals, or we're just looking at these two? We don't think there's anybody else out there that's submitting anything?
Yeah, no, we have a third one. And again, I need to find it, but that individual was more, their proposal was more in a support capacity. And so not in a direct lead capacity of the process. And so they didn't have any public outreach capacity to help us do the public hearings, help us do the outreach, help us gather the comments and respond. And so one thing that we know is we need a team that's going to help us with the response process. So these two were the ones that we looked more closely at, and one of them, in my opinion, more clearly demonstrates the ability to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Again, I'm sorry, this isn't a more robust planned out process. Once we get the contractors on, we'll be able to be more process driven, and hopefully in weeks, but we're not spending 7 hours a night on top of all of our work. Are there other
Well,
input?
Mr.
Yep, go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Chair, sorry. Plan for next meeting. I mean, I know we don't want to necessarily rush things, but it seems like we ought to really be able to get started, and we're kind of not there yet. So how do we keep this committee going in such a fashion that we can at least make that kind of initial leap? Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So I think that the next meeting would be scheduled for the 14th. Is that right, Mandy?
So we kind of looked into some options that are available. There was previous discussion about doing every other Thursday. That would be the off Thursdays from the Community and Economic Development Committee. So kind of future wise, if you wanted to do that, the next one would be October 14th.
So yes, I believe that the plan is to meet again on that day. What I would like to have folks prepared to do for that meeting, and we will draft together in response to that kind of a timeline of the process that we anticipate going forward, and with input from folks sent to Mandy, and then what we bring forward we'll discuss at that committee meeting from a timeline perspective, and ideally at that meeting we will have our contractor in place. That meeting, though, I will actually be out of town for, and in fact be on an airplane at that time, but I don't want the meeting not to happen. And so we just have to kind of figure that process out.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we might want to reschedule that. I mean, there's plenty of time to give the notice to the public, and I just feel like without you there, I mean,
Right.
You've really been guiding the process so far. So I would be interested in rescheduling that meeting.
Yep. So
Agree.
we could do it the day before if we can find a slot in the calendar, because I'll be in town Tuesday and Wednesday of that week. Or we postpone it a week, or we just wait for another month, which isn't ideal, but still we could get the contractor on board and, you know, kind of organize that process a bit more one way or the other. What's the will of the body? What do you think? 2 weeks from now, an alternate time, or let's just wait a month and get the contractor on and then we can call a meeting. Either or works.
I'd rather go ahead with 2 weeks from now, even if it's the 13th. Anyway, yeah, I think sooner is better until we at least get things rolling, because the public wants as much time as possible to comment on whatever we come up with. So I don't want to drag it till we get to that point of having something for them to look at. Thanks.
I absolutely agree. And I think that our real black and white deadline is going to be right around the 10th of November when the state publishes their final plan, which then really gives us the impetus to act. And so I agree. So does anyone disagree with scheduling during that week?
I think, may I speak up, Mr. Constant?
Please.
I think that sounds great. I'm in an all-day meeting for my second job on the 13th, so it doesn't look like we have work sessions on the 15th. I'm wondering if we could maybe do it then, since we're usually all free on Friday.
Yes. So I'm traveling the 14th to the 17th.
Oh, got it. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
But I am here on the 12th and 13th.
Okay, yeah, the 12th would work for me then. Thank you.
So the 12th is an assembly meeting day, but if we meet in the morning, it shouldn't be a problem. Does anybody object to that? Okay, hearing no objection, Madam Clerk, would you help make sure I remember to get that one noticed and start building the agenda? And
Yes.
October, same time, 9:30. And the intent at that meeting is to speak about timelines and contractor introduction. And at that time, hopefully, they're able to help us really organize to push the pedal to the metal. Okay, anything else from members want to add to this? Okay, I'm not hearing anything else. And I think for the most part, I hope folks will take your time to read through the documents. I think nobody's going to have hurt feelings that we have a short meeting today because we have plenty of meeting today. And next, I think if there's no objection, I would turn to audience participation.
Hello? Hello?
Mr. Haberman.
Hello? Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
I'll be brief and welcome everybody. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. I follow the public process, and the public process done appropriately. Decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. What I'm going to say is a plea to those listening on the phone, Assembly members, administration, and members of the public and press if there are there listening. I plead for a sense of calm. The situation at the Assembly chambers in the meeting that's happened the last 2 days has been horrible. It's not safe. I see that without saying names, respectfully to everyone here listening, I see members of the Assembly, administration, members of the press, and members of the public that are there, security, police, unable to bring calm and respect to that room so people can listen to each other respectfully and engage properly. It's not happening. It's gone to a level that as you know, I've attended meetings for some time over the years. It's gone to a new level, a level that we need to reverse that level to a more respect. I know Assembly member, the chair, has tried. I see that. But the efforts being made by the chair, respectfully, at the Assembly for these last 2 days of meetings is not working. It's not working at all. And my situation in that room, I don't want to be in that room, but let's put a footnote. After this public hearing that's gone on, there will be a close, but we'll start a new chapter of people who are not there in that room because of the insane situation that is going on. There is less likely to ever return to that room ever again. And where is the conversation with the people, with the community, dealing with issues? Where is the respect? This has gone on and it needs to stop. But what I see is principal players in that meeting room are not willing to bring order and respect. And the members of the public that is in that room, they created as a rally. They created a situation of, I can't even in myself being in that room get people to consistently be, at least give me a foot and a half away from them for social distancing. Security has made efforts to dealing with the party, waving the red thing around me and feathers all over the place. And security tried to do something and they ignored it. Administration has basically said, look, they have a freedom to protest. That's a public meeting. That's not a place for a rally. I realize many of you understand that, but it's not working. So please,
Mr. Haberman,
my time is up, and thank you.
Thank you for your input. Is there anyone else a member of the public who would like to be heard?
Mr. Constant, can I just respond to Mr. Haberman really quickly?
Ms. Quinn-Davidson, you have the floor.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Haberman for bringing that up. I think many of us absolutely agree with you. What's happening in chambers is disgusting, and it's fueled by a member of our body, and it's really sad to watch. If you have concrete ideas, please feel free to send them to the chair. I know that we're all interested in making sure everyone feels welcome. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you.
Mr. Haberman. Any
Chair-
other members
Chair
of the, go ahead, what's your name?
Yeah, David Neese.
All right, Mr. Neese, you have 3 minutes.
All right, I would just like to thank the chair for setting up a website to have this process available to the public. I think the $70,000 for an interactive map is indeed very important. It is something that you guys have seen in the process with the state. People really enjoy being part of the process, and it gives them something to do, especially data geeks like myself. I do have 2 questions on your people that are bidding on the process. Have any of them been involved in lawsuits on the redistricting process, which usually ends up in court? Is that information going to be presented with the bids? Do you have an upper limit on your bid? I mean, is there a parameter or a window that you're working around? And then I'm just wondering why the default is that Peterson's statement that, oh, we can't do this by April because there's nothing in there that says you can't do a constricted timeline. It is unfortunate that the U.S. Census released the data late, but doesn't tie your hands. So that's just my comment. So I'd love to see that information about whether any of the bidders were previously involved in court action that ended up costing the assembly more money on the reapportionment process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neese. And I'll try to get those answers put up on the website for folks. I do have a question for you. So we're looking at a contract somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 for the work. So you're suggesting that it's a value to you to add 70 to that, so it'd be maybe 150,000.
I think it's a value for all the citizens in Anchorage, simply because if you have watched the state reapportionment, people have been able to look at the maps and moving around, see their districts and stuff. And we haven't had that any time in the past in Anchorage in the 40 plus years I've lived here. And it's just kind of neat to be able to look at that. And I think it would be very useful for the public and allow them to be engaged in the process other than just showing up at the ballot box.
So I would just ask, if you don't mind, send us an email to that effect. I would love to have that to include as we push forward for a funding request.
Copy. And does that just go to you, the chair, or to the board? How does that?
I would just send it to all members is fine. www.mas@anchorageak.gov.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome. Any other members of the public wish to be heard? Hearing and seeing none, I think because of everyone's schedules being so full right now, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn that we'll be meeting again. Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Chair,
Ms. LaFrance.
this is Ms. LaFrance. I just had asked to be in the queue, and just thank you to the members of the public who spoke. Mr. Neese, appreciate you raising those questions. That's very helpful. And then, to Mr. Haberman, definitely any ideas for trying to create a climate of respect to foster that kind of open communication and respectful. Definitely open to ideas. But what I wanted to comment on, Mr. Chair, has to do with communication. And I wanted to let committee members know that I've started to talk with community councils or at community council meetings about the process, and have shared the fact document that you had put together, Mr. Chair, which is extremely helpful. And thank you for doing that. And I wanted to mention to committee members that the 2 questions that have come up have had to do with the time frame and when the changes will go into effect, and just along with that, just the broader time frame of how this relates to the state redistricting process. And then also the question about will there be a scenario where all assembly members will need to run it all at once? So far, it's been a really helpful and engaging, limited, it's only been a few community councils for me, discussion about this process. And I saw, Mr. Chair, too, that I think you had shared information with the Federation of Community Councils, and appreciate that you are pushing out that information, because I know that we definitely share that goal, all of us, to maximize the public engagement and get this information out. So I did just want to comment on that communications piece, and thank you for putting this information out on the website and the work you've done to get that all in one place. Thank you.
You are very welcome. And actually, Mandy, that brings to mind that I look at the list of documents and the memo isn't there. So we should put the memo up on the list of documents for folks to be able to understand the predicate of where we started in this conversation. And so, and to that end also, Mandy, I want to add a third item to the agenda for the 12th. That's timeline, contractor, and communication plan. And we'll ask members if they have other items to add to the agenda as we get closer to that meeting. Unless you have anything you'd like to add now.
Mr. Chair, this is Crystal.
Yep, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. I don't remember, I don't know if you said something about it at the beginning in terms of the map, but the map that's currently on the website is just basically the Anchorage Bowl area. So
Yes.
just wanted to make sure there was something that encompassed the entire municipality.
Absolutely. And yeah, I didn't actually speak to that. And it might be a document that we take down only because at this point it's an outlier and it doesn't make a lot of sense why it's there. And I just didn't think about it after our conversation yesterday because there's so much going on. Any of the mapping that you see there, any of the documents don't have anything to do with our path forward. They're just kind of that one that's there is like what we had on file. That's not a new record. It's just a detail. It's not even the bowl. It's just, I think, mainly my district and part of Midtown and a little bit of West Anchorage. So I would suggest you can review it for interest, but disregard it at this time. Once we get the contractor, that's when the mapping will start in earnest.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Others? Okay, now I'm going to suggest that I welcome a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. See you this evening.
All right, thanks.